What's up, guys? That's gonna be the final time you hear me sing my intro song because this is the end of my How to Play series. This is going to be on Battle, and the first sequence I have here is with Abdul. There's quite a lot of other sequences I put together just to see if I can kind of cover all the basics, I guess, so that you guys can, really understand how the battle system works, as well as like this example itself is actually very complicated, but I wanted to go over something like that just like in all my videos because I figured if I teach you the most complicated of plays, the simpler ones will just make more sense. So in this circumstance, in this scenario, we're going to pretend that player 2, which is of course on this side, and you are player A on this side, neither of you have any cards in your hand. This is the field they set up the prior turn, and it is now your draw, and you draw Thunder. So you literally only have a Ebony Prophet and a Thunder, and this is all they have, and your goal is to in one turn get over all of this field. As you know, Grim gives 2/2 to all light monsters, so Pandora is at 5/5, and Tinkerbell gets 2/2 for every fairy tale, so because there's 2 of them, they're 4/4, and then because they're light, they get 2/2 from Grim. So there's 2 6/6 Tinkerbells, a 5/5 Pandora, and a 5/5 Grim, because it doesn't apply for himself. And the goal is to use just Thunder and Ebony Prophet to get over the whole field. So the proper way to do this is to apply the rules I've been teaching you guys all throughout last week. Once again, this video was supposed to be on Friday, but I've been extremely sick. You might still hear it in my voice, but my boogers aren't dripping all over the place like they were on Friday, so it's not so bad. But the goal would be, the proper way to get over this field is to use 1 to J-activate. And like I mentioned, and you can pay 1 because you have Cruciblessa. Like I mentioned, you can always chase with your ruler's activate ability to your J-activate as long as you meet the requirement. So in this case, because we hadn't tapped for a Magic Stone, we already have all this, let's say, you're allowed to tap to do -3 and 3 to something on their field. You can also do it to chase it to J-activate. So you pay the 1 and you claim your J-activating. J-activate goes into the chase. You then chase to J-activating with the tap effect. So what happens is Abdul would enter the field rested, and you would then do -3 to something. So I'm going to pick Pandora. So mind you, Pandora is now at 2/2. We still have 2 6/6 Tinkerbells and a Grim. You're then going to pay 1 red to use Thunder on Grim, so Thunder would hit Grim, and because he's 5/5, he's removed from the field. And I wanted to use it in this order because I wanted people to understand that if Pandora was 3/3 and was 5/5 and was hit by 3/3, and now Grim's removed from the field, so its normal stats are 3/3, it does in fact get removed. It doesn't. It wouldn't have 2/2 left still, and you just don't apply the previous damage. Any damage done to this is applied. If you have, let's say, 4 Tinkerbells and they're all at 800, and another fairy tale, and that one is just whatever stats, and you kill the other fairy tale, but you somehow did 8/8 to all the Tinkerbells, everything on the field will die. So damage continues on even after it's for the churn. So whatever damage you've done to a resonator, if their stats change and they're now underneath those damage, or it's equal to the damage they take, they will be removed. So then this will be removed, and then of course Abdul twice per turn can blank the effects of a card. So you target 1 Tinkerbell because it gets no stats for its effect, because it gets blanked out, it becomes a 0/0 and dies. And then you then target the other Tinkerbell, and the same thing would happen. So with just a simple Thunder, you were able to remove an entire field and an Abdul, and this is one of the better plays you want to do, because as you can see, the whole point of any card game, of course, is to keep resource. A lot of newer players understand this concept, but they're not so good about going about it. It's very important to note that every single card you decide to use in your deck, anyway, this is the way I think anyway. Every time I decide to use a card in my deck, and the way I do build my decks is I want a card I use to either give me something, so I'm plussing off the effect, or take away something from my opponent. That's a lot of reasons why a lot of people don't use additions in any type of card game, even like equip cards in Yu-Gi-Oh or anything like that. Unless the equip card is really good and you gain something from it, just boosts aren't enough. Because if I have an Abdul, let's say, and I have this card that gives 1,000 to target J Ruler. Of course, this isn't amazing, and now he's 2,000, he'll be harder to kill, but I now have 1 less card in my hand. If there was a card that specifically killed J Rulers, which there really isn't right now, so it'd be better to, let's say, talk about a Resonator, but let's say, let's use Grim. So we have Grim and this awesome addition that gives 1,000,000. Not only while you're attempting to do this can they Thunder Grim and then you lose both cards, and you don't gain anything from using this at this moment, but you also, they can use something like Stoning. They can just Stoning after you have the equip, so you end up losing 2 cards anyway, and you don't really gain anything from it. Whereas if you were to use a card, let's say like, let me try to find one, Familiar of Holy Wind, if you summon this, it says on enter, draw a card. You draw a card. If by any means they just remove this off the field, let's say they use a Dark Bruce Ballesta, of course they didn't have to use much resource because the Magic Stones are always there. He's not losing a card in his hand, so that's actually a proper way to get over Familiar too, but it doesn't matter because you replace this card. If they were to Thunder something like Familiar, it's like, sure, go ahead, I was able to replace my card, but you lost the card for using Thunder. So always note that it's very important to pay attention to how you use your resources. Always try to go about using the least possible cards to get over more cards your opponent controls. That way you're keeping as much advantage as you can, which of course will give you the highest chance of winning. So when deck building, always keep that in mind. Always try to use cards that either give you something or take away something from your opponent. And something to take away from your opponent could be a card like Spiral of Despair. It says discard 2 cards from their hand. So you're essentially losing 1 card, but they're losing 2. So as you can see, if you keep going upon like that kind of pattern, it wouldn't be hard to eventually gain the lead. So my next example is going to be against a deck something like this. I just wanted to be able to go over certain cards. I'm not going to be specifying the Magic Stones in this case because we're going to assume that this player can comfortably use every color I'm going to use, and the same as this. The only thing I am going to show is the Little Redstone. So let's say we have the Little Redstone and there's Lancelot and Gwaine, and let's say this is of course red, and let's say we have 2 other whites to summon Gwaine. So Lancelot is at 8/8 and Gwaine is at 3/7 because he doesn't apply for himself. And the opposing field is, let's say, Feetsing, Familiar of Holy Wind, and you have this stuff in your hand. We'll throw in Thunder in there too. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, we have Thunder too. So there's different ways to go about this field. Let's say if Lancelot if it's their turn and they attempt to attack, note that they can always power him up by 200, which would make him 1,000 because he's already puffed up by Gwaine, which would let him do 700 damage to Feetsing. And this is something you don't want to happen because losing a Feetsing to the effect and then having to most likely block is you're losing 2 cards, and they didn't even use a single card. They used a stone, so they're not losing any resource. The proper thing to do in this situation would be if they declare an attack with Lancelot and they tap the stone, while the stone's effect is in the chase, you would use Thunder on Lancelot, and then you would also pay the green to do 300, and it would kill it before it was able to resolve. That way their little red has no target and they lose their Lancelot, and all they have left is a Gwaine, and you have a Feetsing. So in this case, even if he attacks and uses his effect to rest this and you take 300 damage, you're only taking 300 damage and you have a decent amount of cards left in your hand. You can even choose to Flame of the Outer World Gwaine if you wanted to, and you know, there you can of course always just flame the Lancelot too, but I just wanted to go about using different methods to get over stuff. Always make sure that because everything in this game, well, mostly everything goes into the chase, there's always that small window I mentioned. Like every time something goes in the chase, priority is passed, so you're allowed to respond to it. So it's very important to note that there's all these little kind of windows open for you to use certain card effects to get over their cards, and it works really nicely. What you can do too is, let's say this is the field, and let's say they don't have a Little Redstone. This is just an 8/8 Lancelot, and he declares an attack with Lancelot, and he can't power it up. Let's say he's tapped that on stone, so he's gonna only do 8/8 for sure. You can attempt to block with Feetsing, and then at this point use Flame of the Outer World on Gwaine. Gwaine would then die. This would become 6/6, and of course they would each be at 100 defense left, and then you can sack the Holy Familiar of Wind to do 300 damage and kill the Lancelot as well. So there's a lot of ways to go around about it. You can also Crime and Punishment. You can Glimpse of Kaguya. The reason why I wanted to use this is because of the same reasoning. Let's say if they did have this and Little Red the Stone, and they attempt to attack with Lancelot, you declare block with Feetsing. At this point, he uses this to give it up to 1,000, so he's gonna blow up Feetsing, and the damage is gonna go through. And what you do is, in response, you would Flame of the Outer World Gwaine, so he dies. And then you would also Glimpse of Kaguya, the Little Red's activate ability. And then in this case, you would draw a card off Glimpse of Kaguya, Gwaine would die, the battle would go through, he would be 6/6 and once again be left at 100, and then you would use the 300 and pop Lancelot, and then they would be at, a tapped out stone, and pass turn, and then you would of course be able to draw and continue on with your turn. So that's a really good example of how certain effects work in the battle. If they're trying to buff stuff up, or if they're trying to use certain effects, you can always interrupt in between them to kind of make them lose a card. Remember, in that scenario I described, when I Flame of the Outer World, the Gwaine, and then right afterwards I was able to use Glimpse of Kaguya, note that you're not chasing to it, but it doesn't matter. When Flame of the Outer World resolves, remember in the chase video I did that you can always add to the stack. So once Flame resolves and Gwaine is dead, the effect of Little Red is still in the chase. It's not like Yu-Gi-Oh! Where everything just resolves backwards and it stops. You would then use Glimpse of Kaguya to stop the Little Red, and it's totally legal. It's not like, oh, neither player can chase to Flame in the Outer World, so you can't do it. It's totally fine. Once it resolves, you can keep adding to the stack and just infinitely keep going until either player can't respond. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about symbol skills in battle. I already kind of went over this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But once again, Swiftness lets you attack the turn you enter the field. If you do choose to deactivate a card like Alexander, of course the enter effect will go through and it's 800, the 800 damage will hit Tinkerbell, and let's say if she's the only card on the field in this case, she would die. Note that you can then of course attack directly, but even though Swiftness says you can use your tap ability the turn you enter the field, this does not apply for tapping for magic stones. So as we know, you're not allowed to J-activate or call a stone in the same turn unless your card says, whenever this card enters the field, get a magic stone, because that's of course through the effect. So what you would do is, if you enter the field and kill the Tinkerbell, you can't go, oh, I'd rather have a stone than 1,000 damage, so I'll just tab since I have Swiftness. Your only choice at this point is to attack or to keep it recovered, because you can't tap for a stone and J-activate under any circumstance, even with Swiftness in the same turn. First strike. Let's say this is the example, and you attempt to attack Tinkerbell, and actually let's say they have like 3 more, or 1 more. This is another, let's say Tinkerbell, so they're all at 6/6, and they have, let's say, a Thunder in hand. So if you declare an attack towards this Tinkerbell, and they attempt to block with this one, and you pay 3 red with Cain to shoot Tinkerbell 3 times with the 200 damage, this one would die. This battle would continue. First strike says you do the damage first if you are attacking. Please note it's only when your card is attacking and under no other circumstance. And so you would do the 700, it would die and not have a time to do the 6/6. Once again, for cards like Pierce and First Strike, always think about it as kind of in your head like a cartoon or an anime. Cain would be shooting Tinkerbell, she would die, and she would never have the chance to do the 6/6 to Cain. So it would die, and even in this case, it would only be 4/4 because you remove one of the Tinkerbells. But once this dies, if they go, okay, well, I'm going to Thunder Cain, let's say they attempt to Thunder Cain, it's like, okay, well, I have 200 defense left because First Strike made it so I didn't take any damage, and therefore I'm totally safe. And not to mention at this point, with this Tinkerbell being left at 2/2, you can pay 1 more red and blow it up, so you would get rid of 3 Tinkerbells essentially with a 7/7, even though they were all 6/6. So that's actually really cool too. Flying and Imperishable. Of course, flying means your opponent can't block with anything else but flying. So same thing, let's say if this is the field, you have 400 attack, let's say the treasury effect is not important right now. If you attempt to attack towards the 4/4 Tinkerbell because you have 1,000 defense and only the Tinkerbell will die, this Tinkerbell is not allowed to block because for some reason Tinkerbell doesn't have flying, just in case you're confused. Tinkerbell does not have flying, so you're able to attack into the Tinkerbell and this one can't do anything about it. Now, if they had an Almir Stone and they can give this Tinkerbell flying, they would be able to block, but of course it wouldn't matter. You would be wasting 2 stones because in this field, if one of your Tinkerbells is going to die, it really doesn't matter. But that's essentially how flying works. At this point also, if you take the 4/4 damage and they decide to Flame of the Outer World your Kaguya, Imperishable would make it so that it goes back into the ruler side, and you would go back to the same position you were destroyed in. So if you died attacking, so you were rested, you go back rested, and then of course you can deactivate next turn when you untap. And if you die recovered, you can go back recovered. The only reason why that's important is for, let's say if they have a Tinkerbell, and it's 4/4, and you J-activate, and they decide to flame. Well, let's say you already have this J-activated. You didn't J-activate this turn. If they, let's say, flame in the outer world her, so you're scared to attack or whatever, and this one's still rested. If I, let's say, use a card like Duel of Truth, and I do 400 and 400, and they both die, because Duel of Truth says two things battle each other, and then they take the damage, and this dies, because I have Imperishable, I would go back, and since I haven't J-activated this turn and I'm recovered because that's the position I died in, I could just J-activate again. So this Tinkerbell would be dead, you would J-activate again, and then gain the effects from the enter effect depending on the ruler, or it might not even have an enter effect, but so you could J-activate essentially right after dying, only if you died recovered, and you had Imperishable. So that's another thing to note. With Pierce and Target Attack, once again I mentioned with Pierce it's a little hard to explain with Puss in Boots, but like I said, if you have to imagine it as an anime almost, let's say this is their field, this is rested. When Pierce attacks, let's say you attack Green Cat, and Tinkerbell decides to block because they don't want the Green Cat to die, you would do 1000 minus the 200, and so that's 800 damage that goes through, and the 800 damage would go to the Green Cat. It would not go directly to the player. It also will not kill the Green Cat, and then 600 go to the player. Pierce only goes to the intended target, like I mentioned in the symbol skill video, so if you haven't watched that, you really should, because it's a lot more in detail, but so Pierce goes to the intended target. If I attack this card and this card blocks, those two are the ones that are going to be taking damage. However, if this is the field and I decide to attack you and the actual player, and Tinkerbell decides to block, it would do 200 to Tinkerbell and an 800 would pierce through and hit the actual player. So so always note that it's intended target. It never goes through to the player unless the player is the player you were, the thing you were choosing to attack. So that's just a brief example of Pierce again. And then Target Attack says you can attack recovered resonators. This does not mean that they're not allowed to block. Please note that that's very important, because I actually wish it wasn't, but that's just how the game works. So if I Target Attack, I can attack either of these resonators even though they're recovered. This also applies if they have flying. It doesn't matter. You can attack a flying resonator with Target Attack. It's totally normal. So if I decide to attack Gwen, Feetsing is still totally allowed to block, and if I choose to attack Feetsing, Gwen can block. So the only advantage you get is to be able to essentially choose a recovered target as the attack, but everything else applies normally. So blocking is still totally normal, and of course if I attack Feetsing and Gwen decides to block and I flame in the outer world, Gwen, they'll both of course die, so that would be a kind of a quick way to do that kind of battle if you're trying to get rid of both their cards. And after all the symbol skills, the last card I want to talk about is Mujart. Why this card is kind of important is because it's one of the only cards I could think of that is actually used somewhat, that has the effect to rest an opponent's resonator by removing a counter on an activate, which means it's something that happens on possibly their turn. And so the battle itself, I probably should have mentioned this in the beginning, but the battle itself kind of has 3 declarations before you actually go through. You kind of have the, okay, I'm declaring I'm going to attack in this situation because you're about to go into battle. They're given a window to respond. So at this point I can say, okay, I'll remove a counter to rest your Tinkerbell. Then you can attack with that specific resonator. But of course, if you had a bunch, you'd be able to just attack with everything else. There's the I'm actually attacking. On this ruling, I'm not 1,000,000% sure, but I guess if you specify that you were going to rest before, it will be fine. But I think if they declare to attack with the card and they actually rest it, I'm not sure if you can actually say, oh, I'm deciding to then rest this card, because I know if Hamlin can rest recovered cards, I don't see why Mujart can't select an already rested resonator. I just don't know if the battle then goes through or if it just stops the attack. Either way, you can always, if you know the 2 strongest cards in their field as the ones you're going to be resting, you can rest them upon the declaration I mentioned where they're saying they're essentially going to attack. So even if you wouldn't be able to do it at this point, it should be fine. And then lastly, there's the, if let's say you have Mujart and they have these 2, and they try to, let's say, double Thunder Mujart, so they use 2 of them. You can of course remove the counters to rest them if this is after recovery phase, and then you would lose your card but they would still stay rested. And why it's 2 is because Moonshot actually gets 2 counters. For those who don't know the effect, actually, I'm sorry. It gets 2 counters on enter and 2 for every 6 age that enters, and then you can remove a counter to rest the resonator or remove 2 to draw a card. So in this circumstance, if they were to kill it, you can still use the effect, but if this is recovery, it wouldn't matter because then they would just recover anyway. So you would have to do it after recovery. And that's kind of how cards that have activates that switch battle positions, well, I shouldn't say battle positions, but recovered and rest work. So yeah, that's kind of all the examples of battle I have. I really hope that that was thorough enough for you guys to fully understand. If it wasn't and you guys are missing any of the points, please let me know in the comments below where I'll answer any of the questions you guys have, because I want to make sure that this kind of does fulfill any of those questions people might have. And if you guys actually haven't subscribed yet, I really hope you do, because I actually have maybe some story videos coming this week, and then we have the box opening coming hopefully on Friday. I might have to push it to Saturday, but yeah, I'm really glad people have been watching these how to plays. It's been a learning experience for me as well. So yeah, make sure to comment, subscribe, and I will definitely catch you guys next time.